Hello my friend, and welcome to my full XH2S video review. I've been waiting to put this video out because, like I said in my X-T4 review videos, multiple, I actually like to use the camera. I like to get familiar with it and see its weaknesses, see its strengths, and then talk through them in a review rather than doing more of the clinical testing thing. That has a great place. But with that said, this is not a gear review channel. I like to use my equipment, and then if it's helpful, I will talk about them here on this channel, and that happens to be what I'm doing here today with the Fujifilm XH2S. One thing I should start this video by saying is that I was very happy with my Fujifilm X-T4. There were very few things that I wanted to see improvements on, and the Fujifilm XH2S perfectly accomplishes the things that I wanted to see improvements in, and quite frankly, there are still imperfections that exist coming from the X-T4 to this camera, and I'm just not terribly concerned about them. So I'll talk honestly about those in this video and just kind of share my experience with the camera, but you should know that my initial review is that if you want an X-T4 but better for video, then the H2S is the perfect upgrade in my opinion. And the H2 and the X-T5 are different cameras for a different video, but in short, coming from the X-T4, the H2S has been marvelous for me, and it's Fujifilm's top of the line video specs at the current time, and I am more than happy with it. That's my short review, but we'll go ahead and continue the review. I'm also testing this Sony little recorder thing. Here, let's autofocus test. And that's what is the audio for this video, so that's why it looks like I'm holding a microphone, because I am. Very important for the rest of the review is knowing my shooting style, or what I'm looking for in a camera, and that is a run and gun style camera, lightweight relatively, with the Sigma 18-35. That's my go-to lens. I use it for everything. I don't own hardly any other lenses, and I shoot mostly weddings, and I use this camera, and I want a lightweight setup, something I can travel with very easily. So I'd prefer not to start getting into bulkier cameras, cinema cameras, things like that. I like to stay lightweight, run and gun, but I want cinema-ish quality color, things like that. That would be nice. But those are the sorts of things that I'm looking for. For me, autofocus, IBIS, more of the mirrorless level features, I guess you could say, those are not my highest level of concern. Those are benefits. Those are great features that I like to have, but they aren't my utmost concern, nor are the cinema features like having built-in ND filters or having XLR inputs, things like that, having waveforms, de-squeezing and anamorphic, those sorts of things. I'll address that later on, but those are not my highest priority, nor are the mirrorless features. I am truly looking for a camera that is right in the middle of that road, if there was such a thing, and the H2S, I think, fits right there for me. So anyway, let's keep going. Quickly, before we get into the full review, I'm going to go through 3 things that I love so far about the camera and 3 things that I less than love about the camera. And the first 3 things that I do love about the camera are the fact that the price is pretty affordable. I mean, I know that it's an expensive camera comparative to cameras that are, sub $2,000, of course. And I know for a fact that the FX30 is a more affordable camera, and I know that there are other more affordable cameras out there, yet it's still, in my opinion, under the $3,000 mark, which for me as a professional wanting to buy a camera, under $3,000 is affordable in my mind, and I'm thankful for that because it gives me great specs for the features. So the value is the first thing that I love about this camera. And then the second thing that I love about the camera is the image and the specs, generally speaking, that it gives me at that price. So kind of value and then the image and the specs. I think that this is an incredible image, and I guess that's not just me thinking that. It is a legitimate 14 stops of dynamic range in f-log2 when exposed well, which is insane. I mean, that is the best that Gerald Undone had tested to the point of his review, and that's awesome. But not just the dynamic range, just generally the way that Fujifilm handles an image. The highlight roll-off, the shadow roll-off, the colors, it's all very, very pleasing. And I know people who use cinema level cameras who choose to use Fujifilm either as their B camera or as their like fun video camera if they use like Reds. And that's amazing to me because it tells me something about Fujifilm and the color and just the image that you're getting out of it. 6.2K open gate is so cool, but generally speaking, just the image to me That's the second thing that I love the most. And then lastly is just the user experience. I love using Fujifilm cameras, and I don't know what it is specifically. I can name some things. I like that they give me options in the menu, like a tally light on the front and the back, and I have control over things like that. And I can get the shutter speed to 1/48. Yes, it's not an angle, but you know, I have control over things like that. And that to me just demonstrates something about Fujifilm and the user experience. It's just a pleasant experience. They are aesthetic cameras. They build beautiful machines, and that's really fun. So I would say those are the three things that right off the top I really love the most about this camera. Now for my small gripes, like I said at the beginning, the autofocus and IBIS are not humongous priorities for me. So I'm not terribly concerned about them being imperfect. However, if they were perfect, that would be great. But as of right now, I'm not terribly concerned about that. But yeah, the autofocus and the IBIS, particularly autofocus, seeing improvement continually would be great. If I saw that happen, I would be excited. But again, not a huge necessity for me right now, at least. So then number two, it would be awesome if the F-Log and F-Log2 had a lower native ISO. I would really appreciate it, because at 1250 in F-Log2, you are definitely using some heavy ND, or you are cranking the shutter, which I don't really oppose doing. That's a different conversation. But anyway, the cranking of the shutter is gonna even max out before you get to, you know, needing to lower your ISO. So ISO 1250 coming down for F-Log2 would be awesome. And then connected to that would be if we had a legit second native ISO, because right now there is sort of a cleanup that happens in the noise, and this is documented on my channel and others. But there is definitely something that Fujifilm does, and I think other cameras do as well, but they kind of clean up the image once you get past a second noise threshold. But I don't think that it's an actual dual native ISO, otherwise that they would be selling that as a feature. It would be awesome if we had one at like 6400, not even 12,800. We don't need that. I don't need that. But at 6400, it would be really cool if we had a second dual native ISO, and maybe the bottom one could just stay at 640, or if we could, yeah, get it to 640 for F-Log2. That would be cool. So that's number two. And now number three, and this one is me being very nitpicky here, is the flip screen. I would love if we could just make it universally accepted that we all use the original, like that Panasonic design that now I think Sony has copied. And it's this perfect articulation where it comes back, it folds backwards like a normal camera used to, but then it also can flip around. That would be so cool if just all cameras could start doing that, or a lot of them. Anyway, that would be really cool. So that's probably my third small gripe, is if the flip screen could be literally perfect. Now we begin the full review, and I'm going to start with autofocus, and that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm just going to tell you that Fujifilm's autofocus is good. It is very good. And the XH2S is a good autofocus system. It is not perfect. It is not incredible, but it works for what I need it to do. And that primarily is tracking a subject when moving toward the camera or away from the camera, and I am doing that with my box. I just have the single point AF box turned on, and I am following them with the joystick, or I'm just, you know, reframing, keeping that box on them. That's what I need it to do, and it excels at that. It does perfectly well for me in that. Now, what it doesn't do well is racking autofocus, trying to pull focus from the background to me. Something like this. This is where Fujifilm, I think, is weak in this area. I don't know if it lost me right now because face AF is on, but the face works fine. I hardly ever see it pulsing on the background with the 18 to 35. Maybe it is throughout this whole video, I don't know. But anyway, it does what I need it to do, and that's hard to quantify when it comes to the autofocus because it is so individual. That is something that I know what it does, and I know how I like to use it. But the autofocus is something that for me is just not concerning. So I will say that my review of the autofocus on the XH2S is that it is good. It will work for a thing like an interview. It will work for, you know, a static shot like this where I'm walking to or from the camera, which is what I do sometimes for wedding films, things like that, or if I am trying to walk with a bride and groom exiting or something like that, those sorts of things, it does fine. The things that it's not going to do, and this is a part of the lens conversation, which Philip Bloom has documented and others have talked about, is that it depends heavily on the lenses. And I only use the Sigma 18-35 with the Fringer Pro 2 adapter pretty much. And with this setup here, the autofocus does pretty good for me. So yeah, that's kind of my review of the autofocus. It has never caused a problem enough for me where I have unusable footage if I'm not paying attention. So if it's not user error, then I don't ever come away from a wedding day, which is incredibly important to nail your shots. I don't ever come away from wedding day saying, oh, wow, I have unusable footage because of the autofocus. That's my review of the autofocus. Don't expect it to be racking for you. Don't expect it to pull focus smoothly. Maybe there are certain lenses that can do it with Fujifilm, but I would say in general, don't set your expectation up there. We know that right now, Sony and Canon are the kings of autofocus, and then Fuji falls in line somewhere after that. So that's just what this camera is. I don't know. I would set your expectations right about there. On to the next topic, which is IBIS. Here is the thing. Fujifilm's IBIS is very photocentric. I think that is the easiest way to review it and just say what it is that it is photocentric. It works very well like a tripod. Now, if you are getting movement and if you are following a subject or if you're trying to do handheld shots, you will periodically see a little wobble, but the wobble is not really an issue on this camera. I have hardly ever seen any wobbling in the corners, things like that. But what I have seen is that jumping motion that sometimes happens, but even that, it really only happens when I am holding still and then I move, or if I'm trying a slow pan. And here's the thing that I think about is that it is photocentric, and Fujifilm makes many other photo cameras. And so I think it's important to remember that and say that if you need that, then again, this is all about expectations. Set your expectation there. Now, I will say though that Fujifilm makes great rolling shutter, and I'm not really touching on that right now, but I am. The rolling shutter performance on this camera is amazing, hence the S for speed. The dual stack sensor on this thing is cool. So because the rolling shutter performance is so good, I will say that anything that happens unnaturally in the IBIS almost just looks like shake. It doesn't actually look like, you know, jello. It doesn't look like an unnatural IBIS artifact to me. And it's never, again, for me personally, it's never anything that can't be corrected in post with just a simple stabilize button inside of Premiere, inside of DaVinci. I use DaVinci. I think you could just fix that right up very easily. So anyway, that is kind of my review of the IBIS, and I touched on rolling shutter in there a little bit, but the rolling shutter performance is great. I never see jelly looking artifacts in the footage, and because of that, I think that it helps the IBIS quite a bit. And the next hot topic is the low light performance. I think the low light performance is plenty good. I think that if I can shoot a camera up to like 6400 or up to 8000 ISO, then I shouldn't really be talking about low light performance. That to me starts to become a negligent conversation where it's like, why, you know, I don't know. There are very few needs where I am getting up past 8000 ISO, but Sony has a 12,800, you know, second native readout. So maybe that's why the expectation is set up there. But for me, at 6400, the Fujifilm XH2S is perfectly clean when I leave it on 0 noise reduction. Gerald Undone talks about setting it to -4. I just leave it at 0 because, quite frankly, I don't have and I don't afford the computer that can perfectly process noise reduction. So I think for most people who can't afford that kind of computer, probably just go ahead and leave it at 0. I think it gives a great image, and unless you want to do noise reduction later, then I wouldn't touch it. And that's in F-Log 2 as well as in Classic Chrome as well as in F-Log. I would say just leave it at 0, and I would say that you are almost always getting the same usable ISO. However, in Classic Chrome, which is, you know, or in the video profiles that are not F-Log, F-Log 2, the other film simulations, I would say you can probably take your ISO up maybe a bit higher particularly with classic chrome, because it goes ahead and rolls off those shadows pretty well. So I would say that if you do shoot in classic chrome, you can maybe start to push to 8,000 or 10,000 potentially and still be in the usable territory. Not great, but yeah, that's my opinion on the low light. And this is connected to another conversation, which is this is not a full frame camera. So, you know, Sony, of course, even with their smaller sensor cameras, has that 12,800, but it's important to know that this is not a full frame camera, and Fujifilm has the medium format series of cameras, but because this is APS-C, I think it's just reality that we need to live with, the fact that it's not going to be performing on par with full frame cameras. However, I do think that it's pretty close. So anyway, yeah, that's kind of maybe my 2 cents on the topic, just about the low light and then full frame being connected to that. So connecting full frame into the conversation now, full frame to me is not ideal. I actually don't love that full frame bokeh. Sometimes I like looking at it. It's really nice in other people's work, but I don't always want that in my video work. And so for me, I'm not looking for the deepest, shallowest depth of field. This right here, what I'm looking at on the screen, is more than enough for me. This is good enough depth of field. So I'm happy with it. So anyway, the point being, it's not a full frame camera, so don't be expecting that you'll always have that crazy buttery deep bokeh. And with that also, that the low light is not going to perform to that same level. However, I think it's good. Now for what I think is the last pop topic. That's how I made my note on my review notes, is I called these the pop topics right at the gate. And the next pop topic in my mind is the no record limit and overheating question. So that's just a topic that has to be in every single review video. And if you are looking to record in an extremely hot climate, I don't know, the desert or down in, you know, Texas or something, if you're looking to record in those climates with your camera, you know, uncovered, unprotected in any form in the middle of the summertime, and you want to roll 6K at 30 frames per second or 4K at 120 or at 60, and you just want to let it roll continuously for a really long time, then maybe this isn't the camera for you. That's probably, I would probably go ahead and just comfortably say that. I don't think that it has overheating issues like some cameras in the past have been marked as having. Some people have said the XT4, though I've never experienced it. So I would say that maybe for that like extreme use case, maybe this isn't going to be the perfect camera for that scenario. But for just about anything underneath that, I would say that you're in great shape. I have used this camera up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit in very humid weather and had it roll for, I think, about an hour in 6K, and I set the overheating warning to high. So that was my use case. That was when I did my overheating test, not formally, but yeah, 6K rolled for about an hour, and I maybe could have just swapped the battery and kept going, but I didn't need to, and I don't want to damage the camera. So anyway, that was my overheating test. I have not done long clips of 4K 60 in extremely hot environments. However, recording hot wedding days where I have it in 4K 60 for the entirety of portrait time, and we are in the outdoors, usually, you know, summertime, 90 plus degrees, I never got even a temperature warning or anything like it. So never felt like the camera was excessively hot to touch. So for that pop topic, yeah, the recording limits are awesome. They have removed the recording limits in this camera. I didn't realize how thankful I would be for that, actually. I don't do much long recording. For these videos, I do a bit, but that was a really, really handy update. So now I'm gonna address the things that I think actually matter in a camera. Not to say that the pop topics don't matter, but I think the things that matter more, hence why I bought this camera and hence why I love this camera and think that it's great, would be things like this. And the first one is the price and the value for the specs. I think that having 4K 120, having 6K open gate, having 14 legitimate stops of dynamic range when shooting in f-log2, having beautiful color science, I know that's not a spec, but it gets tossed in the value conversation. Having all of that, having raw output if I want it for any reason, but not that that's something I'm probably pursuing. just having the top end capabilities that this camera offers and the convenience features that are good enough for me, like autofocus, like the IBIS being good, like the no overheating, no recording limits, like having good enough low light for my purposes, all of those things for me add up to $2,500 being a very, very good price. Again, you know, it's a mid-tier camera. It's on the more expensive side. You know, but it's sub 3,000 and I really like it. So everything that I get for that price to me is called good value. Then the image quality, of course, I've talked about this, but not scientifically only. So again, you know, it's not just the science of it that it gets 14 stops at dynamic range. There's also something immeasurable that Fuji has done with their cameras from the X-T3 and onward that I have used personally, that the highlight and the shadow roll off is very smooth. Something about it is very appealing and attractive. And that's just, yeah, there's just more to say there, but the colors are beautiful. I have not had problems with magenta cast or anything like that that is not very easily correctable, if not present at all. I have seen that be talked about online, but yeah. Anyway, the image, I just love it. I think that it's beautiful, and I don't think that I'm the only one, of course. So yeah, then the next thing would be the clean noise texture, kind of on that note of the image. This is something that's just so cool, and I still think to the date it's kind of unique across manufacturers, is that Fujifilm doesn't have hardly any color in their noise. So even if you start pushing your ISO, you know, up into, you know, 8,000 and where you might get uncomfortable, you'll never see colored noise patterns. So it's never distracting. It looks like grain, or maybe the image softens up a bit, but I think that's really nice. I really, really like it. So anyway, yeah, the clean noise texture kind of gets lumped into the image quality category there a little bit. And then there is the internal recording options and the external recording options, but for me, really primarily the internal recording options are what matter the most. I am not terribly concerned about raw output. Cindy Dailies has a great video about that, go watch it. But the internal recording, having 10-bit 422 in camera at 200 megabits per second is awesome. That is a great data rate for me. I really love it. It gives me files that are robust without being oversized. And I recently used a Sony a7S III for a project, and quite frankly, I found it really, really strange that I think I could only get a 100 megabits per second file, and the files are still fine to work with, but it does feel odd to me that we don't have more data than that with a 10-bit 422 file. So yeah, I would say I really like the internal recording options. I'm really thankful that they can pack so much great data into such reasonable file sizes. And then the user experience, and now we really definitely touch on immeasurable parts of using Fujifilm. The build quality and the ergonomics and the look of the camera are just fantastic. And that is so dumb that that factors into our use of our cameras, but it's a real thing. The factor, you know, of the aesthetic and the whole experience of our hands on the camera, that is a very real part of using our cameras. I mean, they are tools, but it matters if you like to use a tool or not. And so that's the first thing that in the user experience category, I just really enjoy. Then the menus and the buttons. For some people, maybe the menus are a bit overwhelming. I know Gerald Undone mentioned that in his review, and yes, Fujifilm gives you a ton of options. However, I do think that I want all of those options. I actually really appreciate having all of the options that Fujifilm gives me, and sometimes I wish we had more. I'll mention that later, but I love having all of the options. However, once I get past my initial setup and my, comfortability with the camera, I don't think I hardly ever have to touch the interior of the menus. So my button layout, that's where I get to the user experience with the buttons. My button layout is perfect for me, and I have my Q menu set up and my menu set up in such a way that I rarely ever have to actually go into the menus. So yeah, I love the fact that Fujifilm gives me all the menu options that they do in a modern looking aesthetic. Again, I know that's silly, but using some other cameras, I just really don't like looking at their menus. But Fujifilms feel like they're usable. I don't know. Again, that's intangible. That's just my opinion, but I do like their menus. And then the custom dials. So now here's a couple of sort of gripes with this, is that custom dials, you cannot change what goes into that custom dial, meaning that I can't say I only want to save these settings on the custom dial. So it saves literally everything into that custom dial. And so you get to the point where the custom dials start to become maybe a little bit frustrating to use. And I was super excited about them at first, but now they might feel like they are a little bit lacking, because I would appreciate having more control over what goes into that custom dial. So that's just one small thing. That's a small gripe. And then of course the ISO button cannot be programmed anywhere else, and you can't put it, or no, you can program the ISO button anywhere else, but you cannot put ISO on a dial, on the front or the back dial, which is a really strange oversight to me. And I'm hardly even going to talk about it here because I'm hoping that it's going to get fixed in a firmware update. I really don't know how that's been overlooked to this point, but I am so confident that it will be addressed that I'm not going to continue talking about it right now. And then the cinema capacity of this camera is the next kind of benefit on the list. I really think that there are few cameras near this price point that you could, probably Panasonic is the big one, of course, but I think that this camera could truly be pushed to its limit and be approaching cinema image and usefulness territory for people who are looking for a budget short film kind of camera, that they don't want to have to go rent something really big and intimidating, or they don't want to have to go spend, $4,000 to $5,000+ on a bigger setup. I think that if you invested, $3,500 in an H2S, some vintage lenses, some other, rig type solutions, which I'll be making a video about soon, I think that you have yourself a crazy high quality image in an amazing little package. And it's just mind-blowing to me that this thing is so capable at that price. So anyway, the cinema potential of this camera in terms of its image and other features, that's something that I just think has to go on the review of the kind of the pros list. And then finally, it takes photos. The photos are really good. They're really, really beautiful. And it takes them at really, really high burst rates, because S for speed. And yeah, it's Fuji. We all love Fujifilm's photos. I mean, it's great. So that's really cool that a camera this feature rich in terms of video also is highly capable. And quite frankly, if you just wanted to buy it as a stills camera alone, there are lots of people doing that, and it's awesome for it. So that's cool. The sun has officially set and I need to wrap this up. So I have my final gripes and random information category here. And I would love to see Fujifilm incorporate some cinema software updates or something like that. I would love to see an anamorphic D-squeeze, maybe a waveform, maybe better manual focusing tools. I love like the Canon arrows that line up. I really like that feature. But things like that would be nice if it had some more cinema-esque kind of features, but that's a gripe. That's a very small gripe. Then the CF Express Type B, this is on just the random information kind of area. And actually it's a Fuji appreciation note, which is that not many manufacturers are going with CF Express Type B. However, Fujifilm did, and they recommend that you use SanDisk cards, which are like $400, or, my point is they're very, very expensive. However, Fujifilm with the X-T4 and the X-T3 also recommended very high-end expensive cards, and I continue to use my very cheap SanDisk SD cards with that camera, with those cameras, and I continue to use them with this camera, those very cheap SanDisk SD cards. So following that back to the CF Express Type B, I bought a very cheap Angelbird 512 gigabyte card, I think for $170, which is still very expensive. But I bought that card because if I shoot in 10-bit 422 at H.265 at 200 megabits per second, that's almost always where I'm shooting. If I do that, I think it gives me like 6 hours of record time, maybe a lot of record time. So I essentially just keep the CF Express card in the camera as a backup running at all times, and I just dump it whenever it starts to get too full and I need to clear it up. That's it. So I just leave that thing in there running as a backup, and I really appreciate the fact that Fujifilm, despite recommending the high budget cards, still allows their cameras no bottlenecks to output to these cheaper CF and SD card solutions, so that we don't have to go break the bank on those way more expensive cards. Now, the battery life, this is just in the random info section. Maybe someone thinks that I should have put it up in the big part of the review, but at this point, to me, in my opinion, almost all mirrorless cameras are reaching the point of having the same battery life. Fujifilm upgraded the battery last generation of cameras in the X-T4, and now with the NP235, I think is what it is, I've not had any complaints about my battery life. The X-T3 was a very small battery, and I did have complaints about that, but this camera seems to work just fine. I have been recording all of this on one battery continuously in 6K, and I still have 3 bars left out of battery. So it works just fine for me. I think that the battery life is way more than sufficient. And the next one is the flip screen, which is good. It's actually great because it doesn't hardly affect the ports at all. I can tell that the engineers did a great job thinking through the actual user experience on this thing. Instead of just throwing a bunch of ports on the side, it feels very convenient for my user experience with the camera. I have yet to feel like it's in my way, the flip screen, when I'm plugging things into the side. So that's awesome, but again, back to the very beginning, I would love to just see that Panasonic 3-axis screen become universal for everybody. These are the last couple bits of random information or gripes, and that is the lens choices for Fujifilm are good, not great. I think that there is room to grow with Fujifilm, especially on their video-oriented lenses. However, I continue to use the Sigma 18-35 with the Fringer EF FX Pro 2 adapter, and I've not been disappointed so far. I should make a dedicated video about the experience with this camera and the adapter and the lens. I will make that soon, but anyway, it works just fine for me. So then, related to the lenses is that weird zooming exposure change thing that happens with Fujifilm. I think it's unique to them across manufacturers, and I don't know what is happening there. I really don't. I don't know that anyone does, but some Fuji lenses, I think, or maybe all of them, an exposure change happens when you zoom. But it doesn't happen for me with the 18-35 or other adapted lenses, so it's hard for me to say. But apparently that matters for some people, so I figured I should mention it in the review here. It doesn't matter for me, specifically with this lens, and also in general, I don't tend to use footage where I am actively zooming in my videos. Last very funny one is the still and movie switch got taken off of this camera, so you just have the PASM dial on top, and I kind of wish that I did have the still and the movie switch. I just liked it being as clean as a switch that said still or video. I wish that was back. Wow, I just realized how long this video is, and I would apologize, but again, I'm not a gear review channel, so this wasn't efficient. I'm just talking about my use of the camera. So I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope this video is helpful for you. If you have questions about the H2S, please let me know below. Really, this video was just me talking through the camera, talking through my user experience with it in the real world, as well as kind of assessing the values and things like that. Hopefully you saw a ton of footage. That's something I really try to do in my reviews is try to put in a ton of actual use case footage, not just talking about the camera. So if this was helpful for you, leave me a comment, let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Subscribe, like, comment, do those things. It helps me, it helps my channel grow. If you want LUTs for Fujifilm, if you want anything like that, please check out my shop, also linked below, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. God bless you, my friend.